to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And let me see, today's topic, oh my gosh, it's so funny how I set up these topics and then, get so distracted. Sometimes I forget. So today's topic is emotional patterns. And I think when we recognize that we have these patterns and that they are habits, that gives us an opportunity to intervene with those habits and shift them and change them more readily than if we view our emotional states as something that happens to us and that is a beingness rather than a pattern or a habit. But I think it'll be an interesting conversation. So before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, energizing all your cells and your molecules and your electrons, and creating this brilliant beam of light that radiates out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together and softly, softly, softly rub your fingers against your palms to feel the deliciousness of that sensation, and bring yourselves present right here, right now, to these magnificent physical forms that enable us to experience life. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Emotional habits. This is such a great. Good morning, Rosalind. So good to have you here with us this morning. Welcome, welcome, and welcome to everybody else who's joining us. I so appreciate your participation in these conversations. It's enriching not only for me, obviously, but for everybody else who gets to join us, whether it's live or later. Anyway, emotional habits. So often, when we reflect how we're feeling, we don't say, I'm feeling depressed, or I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling angry. We say, I am angry, I am sad, I am happy even. But those are not so much states, they're not part of our beingness, our whole essential essence. They are an emotional state. And the emotions that we experience, they're states of experience. And when we can recognize that these emotions are often patterned states, I think it gives us an opportunity to step back from that pattern and to potentially redirect it if we can do something called a pattern interrupt. So you know how when you start to get angry, it's like there's this momentum building, and then it gathers steam, and it's like a runaway locomotive. Sometimes those emotions can be, and it's not just with anger, but with all kinds of emotions. And so if we can recognize that those emotions, that we have emotional patterns, we kind of are trained into certain responses to situations and certain emotional responses. For years and years, my go-to emotional response was anger. And that's something that was prevalent throughout my whole family. that the first response was the anger. And so whenever there was a feeling of friction or frustration, it would go into intense anger. And it was a habit. And so we've been talking about habits. And this is really interesting because I was working with a client yesterday, and they recognized a particular response. And it wasn't just an emotional response. It was, a response of defensiveness or a response of victimhood. In that case, it was a response of victimhood, feeling at the effect of. And it was, they had a revelation that was just so beautiful, where they recognized, well, wait a second, if these feelings are arising, rather than going into full-blown victim, I can use it as an opportunity to notice that there's something available for me here that I wasn't previously noticing. So in other words, starting those feelings, instead of going into victim, going into wake up, right? And it was a gentle message from their self to hold on, there's something for you to notice here. And with that gentle reminder from self, that it enabled them to shift into a different mindset and a different emotional state. So rather than getting angry, getting curious, rather than becoming a victim, getting curious. Like, what's going on in this situation? What's the dynamic? What triggered that feeling? Getting curious. And when we get curious, when we ask dynamic questions, our mind is like a heat-seeking missile. It wants to answer those questions. That's why it's so important to ask good questions. But when we get curious, it's like, oh, what is there for me to learn here? What is there new for me to see? What's a different perspective that I can take on this? And it was really, really cool, because what those moments become and became for my client is a choice point. And when we are at a choice point, when we empower ourselves with the option to choose, we're taking our experience to a whole new level, and it is empowering. We are literally empowering ourselves when we choose to take advantage of that choice point. And we then are coming back into our sovereignty. We're coming back into our expression as conscious individuals, where we're reclaiming the reins of our lives, that we're able to reclaim our active role in our lives, and to release ourselves from the automated automaton type responses that we can fall prey to, right? Because we are conditioned beings in many, many ways. And when we can sort of pattern in or program in this pattern interrupt to allow ourselves to awaken to the pattern, what we're doing really is remapping a trigger. So there may be a trigger that then starts leading into victimhood. If we can, instead of having that trigger leading into victimhood, have it lead into choice, what a big difference, right? So this was such a beautiful thing. And actually, this is a lot of what NLP is about. Neuro-linguistic programming is recognizing these pattern behaviors and shifting and redirecting them. by creating new triggers, creating new neural pathways that lead to different responses. And the more that's practiced, the bigger the pipe is, or the bigger the channel is for that new communication. If you think of it as laying down communication wires, that the more you utilize that pattern, the more you practice that pattern, the stronger those connections become. Good afternoon, Pat. So good to have you here with us. Welcome, welcome. We are talking about patterned emotions and or emotional habits, and how we can restructure them. Maggie's biting my nose. So she's a pattern interrupt for me all the time. It gets me to just sort of stop and rethink whatever. It's often I forget where I was, which is a good thing sometimes, right? But anyway, we were talking about pattern interrupts and shifting our behaviors. And so one of the practices in NLP that's so powerful is to start eliciting a pattern. And just as that feeling, let's say we're wanting to recondition an emotional response. So just as that feeling is emerging, like as I'm getting to a point where I'm beginning to get angry, then we've already patterned in a trigger to say, okay, elevate, for instance. Like what I can do is I can create this awesome trigger or anchor, as we call it, to a positive or desired emotion. So let's say I want to shift sadness to curiosity or interest, or maybe even joy. Maybe we can even do that. What we can do first is anchor that feeling in. So like to think of something, we did this the other day with the hands and putting the different energies in the different hands and then bringing the hands together. It's called collapsing an anchor, but what we're doing here is creating an anchor. And Rosalind says, interrupting the pattern required awareness to the habit. Exactly. I was projecting that my coworkers weren't contributing to making progress on projects. I had to separate their performance and the person for who they are. It's helped me to have less frustration at work. That's brilliant, Rosalind. Yes, and you're 100% correct in saying that we have to be aware in order to recognize the pattern, in order to be able to put things in place to interrupt it. So, and the awareness that you were having this projection around your coworkers, when you had the awareness is the first step to being able to shift the pattern. So when you were able to separate their performance from who they are, then you probably expanded your ability to deal with those people as people, and then maybe that granted some inroads to being able to shift performance as well, and expectation and connection. And when there's more connection, there's more communication, and maybe that helps to resolve the issues at hand. So we were talking about how to create an anchor, and let's say we're forget what the word was, but I don't know, we can create any word as an anchor, but maybe it's curious or enliven or any word. But what we do is we find the feelings that we want, desire feeling, and we presence those, we embody those feelings in our bodies. Good morning, Bernadette. We're talking about patterned emotions and how to shift those patterns. So you can generate the experience of a desired feeling by remembering times when you felt that way and making it bigger. And if there's a visual for it, you can add a color, you can brighten the colors, you can make it closer. Sometimes that makes it feel even bigger and even better. And as those feelings are arising, then we say our word, like enjoy or enliven, and practice that, so that when eventually what happens is that when we say enliven or enjoy, it stimulates that emotional state. So we start by using the emotional state and connecting it with the word until we get to a place where just the word itself brings forward those emotions. And then what we do is we find ourselves into the undesired state. And just as that train is starting to pull out of the station, then we use our desired anchor to trigger the desired emotion, and we pattern that. So you pattern from the victim to freedom, for instance, and you pattern it as you first strengthen freedom, and then you start feeling victim. You don't let yourself get deep into it. You just start feeling victim and then freedom, and then start feeling victim and then freedom, and then start feeling victim and then freedom. And what happens is that it starts becoming automatic, because really we prefer to feel something positive than negative if we just have the pathway to do it. So then anytime victim starts coming up, your body and being just says freedom or choice or whatever it is that's the desired state. So Pat says, I get angry with my husband when I get home from work, as he has been toxic during the day. I'm so grateful to you. I'm now going to use the word calm. Beautiful. Okay, beautiful. I love that. So the thing you want to do, Pat, is practice calm. Like you want to anchor calm and feel that calm, and then bring that word in. And if you want to bring that word in as an anchor for that, you can even visualize that word, and you can give it the perfect colors or sparkles, or like these beautiful starlight or rainbow or whatever it is that makes you feel even more calm as you're getting into that space. And you can even, again, we talked about physical anchors. You could, for instance, tap your knee or hold your hands together in a certain way that embodies or supports the embodiment of that experience of calm. And as you just want to make the calm experience stronger, way stronger than the anger experience. And so you pattern from that anger to calm, sit in the calm, and then a little tiny bit of anger as anger is starting to rise, calm. And it's a really, really powerful technique. So I'd love to hear how it works for you. Bernadette says, I try to set an emotional boundary, which helps me to speak from the heart and not from the emotional wounds that may arise via any conversation. That's the practice, Bernadette, right? That's a biggie. And of course, healing the emotional wounds, but good for you to be finding that place that is not attached to the identity of those emotional wounds, to recognize that those emotional wounds are not who we are. They may be wounds that we carry, but wounds can heal. And that's a wonderful thing. If we allow ourselves not to identify with those wounds, like when we allow ourselves to release the wounds of our past. We often use the wounds of our past to to brutalize ourselves and others, through victimization of ourselves and blame of others. And it's not that those patterns aren't valid. We've experienced things where we were victimized, and from an outside perspective, we were the victim of this, that, or the other thing. However, to have been the victim of something does not mean that you have to be a victim in your beingness. It becomes something that happened. And thankfully, there are ways that we can release ourselves from the identification with that experience, there are ways that we can grow beyond those kinds of experiences. And part of it is how we identify ourselves. I'm not saying in any way to deny our experience, because our experiences have very deep and multi-leveled impact. And we can get to a place of healing and wholeness where we're not defined by that experience. So we're that and so much more. And Bernadette says, to me, wounds need to be absolutely healed. But let me just say that with better emphasis. To me, wounds need to be absolutely healed. But sometimes via a conversation may trigger how I speak to the person who is triggering that specific emotion. So I agree that wounds need to be healed, because if we don't heal them, they fester. And it's interesting, because in the work I do, I work with people of all ages, but I've seen issues arise that people have been holding for more than 50 years, thinking that they were healed even, like, I've done so much work on this, how come it's still here? So good morning, Lisa. Welcome to have you. It's great to have you back, and to be seeing you more often here. So we're talking about emotional habits, or habits of emotion. And so to get back to what Bernadette was saying, sometimes via a conversation, it may trigger how I speak to a person who is triggering that specific emotion. So here's the thing, we all have buttons that get pushed, right? We all have things that make our teeth grind, right? And the thing is that we are all, to varying degrees, we are all minefields of these triggers, right? And heaven help anybody that walks barefoot through that minefield, right? They're going to trigger all these things and all these reactions, and it's crazy time, like, we don't know what each other's buttons are. And so where I come from is, yes, if you're in partnership with someone, you have a responsibility to be supporting them in healing their triggers, and not triggering their triggers deliberately. But it's not a fair expectation to expect another person to be dancing around all these triggers that might be there, right? Like contorting themselves to not be pressing those buttons. It's pretty, ultimately, our buttons are our responsibility, and that's where freedom is. If we're dependent upon if our well-being is dependent upon the psychic ability of others to determine where our buttons are and to avoid them, we're in for a pretty rocky ride, because people don't have that capability, nor should other people be spending their lives trying to navigate around our own buttons, and when you're in a partnership or in a relationship, recognizing those things, maybe we can support each other in moving through them. Bernadette says, therefore, when I'm aware of the triggers, and it may not necessarily be what the receiver is speaking. So for me, boundaries are so important. So what I'm understanding from what you're saying, Bernadette, I think is that you're setting internal boundaries to kind of insulate those buttons so that you're not making this about others, but you're being aware, you're trying to relate to the other as a person, despite whatever those triggers are. And if you're able to do that, that's awesome. And it's all part of the path of healing too, right? And when I get triggered, I look at what is going on for me that I'm reacting that intensely to this. What's up with that? So again, instead of killing the messenger, we get to look at, hey, what's going on over here that's so disruptive. Bernadette says, speaking our truths to our partner as to what the triggers are is about communication. Exactly. And there is a dance to do between their responsibility to not trigger and our responsibility to clear those triggers. It's like a dual path. Bernadette says, but it's also important to find out what theirs are also. 100%, 100%. So thank you again for another awesome conversation. I so appreciate you and your engagement and your authenticity and your willingness to be visible. You light up my days. And I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live each weekday morning here on Enlightened World Network's Facebook page at 9 a.m. Eastern. And please check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network, EWN One with the Earth. Here's Maggie Bernadette. She's here. She's been chewing on me, just not in view of camera. So thank you for requesting her presence. See, she's so you got a dose of Maggie, and so much love to all of you. And I look forward to seeing you again here really, really soon. Thanks so much.